Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. Welcome back to part 2 of Let's See How Low Some Women Can Stoop. We're continuing to tear down this article titled, Why Many Women Cheat Not to Leave But to Stay. Funny enough, the place we left off on takes us right to the subheading, Cheating to Stay in a Marriage? For these women, an affair wasn't about replacing their spouse, it was about filling a gap. They had tried to communicate their needs, but nothing changed. Rather than stewing in frustration or resentment, they found that an affair allowed them to meet their needs elsewhere, easing tension at home and helping them stay in their marriages. Instead of growing distant or bitter, they felt more patient, engaged, and even affectionate in their day-to-day lives. They weren't looking for the one. They were looking for Mr. Now and Then. Love? Feelings? Emotional entanglements? Absolutely not. This article is really making a repeated point that these women had tried to communicate their needs, but nothing changed. This says to me one of two things. Either their methods of communicating were not clear, severe, or persistent enough, and their partners really just were not picking up what they were putting down, or their husbands were completely clueless, indifferent, or worse yet, felt entitled to everything their partner was doing while contributing absolutely nothing themselves. Now, to be very clear, I am not saying this latter situation doesn't happen. It does, often even. However, in this case, I would really be wondering why, instead of leaving this inept partner, it would be preferable to attempt to stay in the marriage while sneaking around behind his back and having an affair. Like, if the woman decided she was going to stay in the marriage no matter how terrible things got, despite all her attempts at communication, I could at least give her points for commitment to her vows, I guess. But that whole thing goes out the window with the having an affair bit, so I really don't understand how this is supposed to be some sort of saving grace. The pragmatism of women's infidelity. I found that these women designed their affairs with military precision, strict rules, clear boundaries, and zero risk of anyone catching feelings. This is another weird thing they keep bringing up as if it makes any of this any better. It really doesn't. After all, the research shows that men tend to experience stronger betrayal from sexual infidelity than from emotional betrayal. So, in most of these cases, these women's husbands would absolutely not be relieved to hear that their wives are seeking just orgasms from men outside the marriage. This article dressing up this behavior with words like pragmatism, meeting needs, military precision. It's also weirdly complimentary of such a scummy behavior that it honestly makes my skin crawl. But speaking of skin crawling, just check out this next bit. But let's talk about another practical move these women made. Not putting all their eggs in one basket. Many women maintained multiple affair partners at once. Not because they were greedy, but because they'd already learned from marriage that relying on just one man for everything was a risky bet. So they kept a roster or herd of partners to ensure they always had options. One woman put it best. Why would I expect one affair partner to meet all my needs when my husband couldn't? It was a backup system, not a romance. They weren't juggling relationships, they were managing logistics. Practical. Let's not just have one affair partner, let's have a whole room full of affair partners. Maybe they can all meet up for a beer after running a train on you to talk about how much of a chump your husband is. Oh my God, I don't understand how anyone could have put these words to paper. Put these words to Psychology Today, no less, which is absolutely all the worse, and published it publicly for other people to read. What a seriously terrible day to have eyes. They weren't juggling relationships, they were managing logistics. Are you absolutely kidding me? Just don't get married. It's that simple. If you don't believe a husband can meet all your needs, don't have a husband. Or at least don't have one that expects you to remain faithful only to him. And in the event that Whoops, you got married at 19 and had no idea you'd actually grow up to be an insatiable nymphomaniac beholden to no one man. Well, time to do the responsible thing and inform your husband that you are unfortunately not capable of maintaining fidelity to him and will therefore begin pursuing divorce if he is not comfortable with this. Anything less than this, and you can stop pretending as though you have any honor whatsoever. Managing logistics. Jesus bloody Christ. Are we setting ourselves up for failure? This research forces us to ask some uncomfortable questions about how we approach relationships, starting before we even say, I do. Why aren't we talking about sexual expectations before marriage? We spend months planning a wedding, but often skip the part where we discuss what we need sexually to stay happy in the long run. I actually agree with this one personally. There are some cultural elements that do contribute to this problem. Obviously, in certain religious communities, sex before marriage is heavily frowned upon, and even barring that, there is still just a general overall stigma against talking very openly about sex in society. It's still treated a bit like a taboo that shouldn't be discussed except behind closed doors. And there's even open debate about the extent to which it should be taught in schools, for goodness sake. So, yes, granted, it's no wonder that we encounter situations where people enter into what is supposed to be a serious, lifelong commitment with someone without knowing much about their sexual needs and proclivities. I'm not saying that it's something that we need to get comfortable talking about in every conceivable space or facet of life, but talking about it before marriage should practically be a requirement. Why do we assume desire stays the same over time? We expect everything else in marriage to evolve. Why not our sexual needs and expectations? Now, beyond an obvious discussion around expectations for sexual frequency, preferences, proclivities, etc., that every couple should have, ideally early on in a relationship, I'm going to start by saying that the author's proposition is a little bit of a meaningless philosophical exercise at best. First, I don't believe anyone assumes that desire stays the same over time. There are common jokes about the decrease in frequency of sexual intimacy over time in a marriage, especially as children enter the picture. Now, validity or lack thereof of these jokes aside, the argument that people believe that they're going to screw like bunnies even into their twilight years just doesn't really align with reality. Furthermore, even if we entertain the question of how things may eventually change, it is very difficult to talk about things in a prospective nature versus actually experiencing them. You can talk, and quite thoroughly at that, about how, say, having a child might impact your sexual desire and how you might think to work around that. But honestly, it's hard to set a plan in stone until you experience it in the moment. There's only so much you can expect to prepare in advance. It's more about being able to roll with the punches and be adaptable with each other, and to support each other through the changes that life has to offer. I don't know, though. If you're the sort to expect to be okay with sustaining an ongoing affair, or multiple affairs, as the case may be, the moment things get a little bit tricky, well, you might want to talk about that one in advance. Why is just talk to your partner treated as a fix all? Many of these women did communicate their needs. The problem wasn't silence, it was being unheard. Because communicating effectively with your partner is one of the best ways to ensure that the relationship stays healthy. As I have said already, it's not foolproof. Certainly, there are men out there who will be determined, in one way or the other, to neglect their partner's needs. They may be selfish or self centered. They may be lazy or entitled. They may be clueless. They may misunderstand. Any number of reasons. But I do believe that, more often than not, most people do have a fantasy of a simple life where both they and their partner are happy and that things run smoothly. The most likely way this will happen is effective, assertive communication and a willingness to hear the same in return. Now, as I've already said and will say again, if you have a situation where you make legitimate, repeated attempts to assert your needs and your bids for attention are repeatedly ignored or denied, I do not understand why your brain would go to, let's keep this guy who's flagrantly refusing to hear my pleas around and find a side piece or two, rather than simply recognizing that the relationship is not working for you and moving on. Hey, a final caveat. If in the end you wind up talking to your partner about your needs not being met, and you tell him straight up that you're going to find sex elsewhere, and he gives you the thumbs up to go do that, all of this gets pushed by the wayside. Bless you both and go on with your bad selves. But somehow, I doubt this will be a common outcome. What happens when one partner wants sex and the other doesn't? We rarely ask what realistic options exist when sexual needs go unmet in long term relationships. Okay, well, as is the case with most of the rest of this article, I'll maybe consider giving this more than half a second's thought when we also extend the implied answer to this question in the context of this article to male partners as well. When we want to discuss the, frankly, much more common scenario where wives begin to more frequently rebuff their husbands' affections, and the husbands decide that they're going to go engage in a carefully managed strategic affair so that they can have their needs met, then go ahead and give me a call. Until then, the realistic option when sexual needs go unmet in long term relationships is the same answer as to when any other needs aren't being met. You first talk about the problem with your spouse, and then, if nothing changes, you determine whether the need is dire enough to consider leaving, or to talk with them openly about alternative arrangements. Maybe women's sexuality is a whole lot more complex and pragmatic than we've been led to believe. I think you're only saying that because you're positively tripping over yourself to excuse behaviors in women you wouldn't think to excuse in men. I mean, look no further than this recent example to see how the internet gleefully rips to absolute shreds this man that was caught publicly cheating on his spouse. Serves him right, if you ask me, but just imagine the idea of talking about him in the kinds of positive terms that this article is using. Oh, he was just trying to address unmet needs. He was just trying to be pragmatic. Give me an absolute break. We all know this is trash tier behavior when guys like this do it. Same is true for women. These women weren't looking to betray their husbands, but they did. They were looking for a way to stay. They were looking to avoid putting on their big girl panties and ending a relationship that's not meeting their needs. But when years of unmet needs and unheard conversations pile up, they ask themselves, what realistic choices are left? And they found no real answers. Because taking responsibility is hard. Before I get to the last paragraph, I wanted to take a moment and get into a little bit of Prim lore that, unless I am remembering wrong, I don't think I've shared before. The fact is, I was married once before, and one of the reasons I'm being so hard on this article, other than the obvious reasons, is that I have personally experienced being in a relationship where frequent conversations about my concerns and needs went unheard. Not just in a sexual sense, but in a household task sense, in a financial sense, in a general goals for life sense, and more. Out of respect for my ex partner, I don't need to publicly air all of that dirty laundry. I don't think he is a bad person at all. In fact, to this day, I still smile to think of many positive qualities he did have. However, the fact is, the relationship was absolutely a disaster by the end of it. It was a whirlwind relationship with a quick proposal based on foolish, borderline teenage emotions, and with little experience together to truly understand the ways in which we were incompatible. Unfortunately, it all happened so fast that it didn't become fully clear until it was too late. After many conversations where my concerns were dismissed, I eventually realized I couldn't continue on. Did I continue to drag things out because of the positive traits I did appreciate and find something on the side? No, I did not. I took a weekend of self reflection and then came to my ex and told him it wasn't going to work. Was it painful? Yes, it was excruciating knowing I was hurting him so badly. I felt like a monster. I was so embarrassed, and I felt like I'd made a terrible mistake I hoped I would never make. But God, in the end, am I glad that I made that decision. I eventually came to meet my current husband, who was the direct opposite in many ways, willing to take my concerns seriously, willing to have assertive conversations, very willing to take my needs into account. I like to think my ex found someone who was much, much better suited to his needs and preferences as well, and I very much hope he is happier. Sometimes making the hard yet responsible choice results in better outcomes for all. But hey, that's just not what this author is about, is she? Instead of treating every episode as a scandal or moral failing, maybe we should be asking a different question. How can marriages evolve to actually meet both partners' needs before one or the other partner starts looking outside of it to meet their needs? I've got a better idea. Why not both? Why don't we see, where appropriate and feasible, how marriages can evolve to meet both partners' needs and treat infidelity like a moral failing? I will never understand this absolute avoidance in society to hold women accountable for any of their actions. The accountability gap is alive and well, and never will that become clearer than in articles like this. Until we as a society decide to step up and start calling out behaviors like this in women that we would have no second thoughts about doing in men, until we make altruism and caring about others higher values than self indulgence and self centeredness, I fear for the state of male female relationships going forward. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one.